Hello, on December 21st, 2020, if you went out at night just after sunset, and if you were lucky enough to have fairly clear skies, you saw a brilliant star in the west. And as the sun got lower and lower, it would set. So anywhere from an hour to 2 hours or so, depending on where you live, you could see this brilliant star in the western sky. And I'm making this video on December 27th, almost a week after it, and you may still be able to see it to some extent, not quite as brilliant as it was on the 21st. We're going to learn in this video why this particular Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is so brilliant, why it's important to astrologers for other reasons in addition to the fact it's so brilliant, and whether the Star of Bethlehem, the star that's talked about at the birth of Jesus in the New Testament and that we sing Christmas carols about, whether it was the same thing. Many people, including people like Johannes Kepler, speculated that the Star of Bethlehem was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. But we're going to look at all these things. We're going to learn a lot of details about astronomy and astrology to sort through this. Okay, so first of all, when did the conjunction happen? It happened between 18 hours and 20 minutes and 18 hours and 21 minutes universal time. Where I live here on the east coast of the United States, that means it's between 1:20 and 1:21 in the afternoon. That is when the conjunction was most exact. But Jupiter and Saturn move very slowly, so they're very close to each other for days or weeks, depending on what you consider to be very close. But within a few days of that exact moment, they are extremely close. And as I mentioned, it's visible just after sunset. Now, on the evening of December 22nd, I got on my roof and looked at it because I have all these big trees around me. I got up and I was surprised. It was like, whoa, this thing is really bright. Like, holy moly. Really, really spectacularly bright. Why was it so bright? Because this particular conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, in this particular one, Jupiter and Saturn got so close to each other within 7 minutes. Now, to get an idea of what 7 minutes is, if you put your arm out and you make a fist and you look up at the sky, your fist is very roughly about 5 degrees. It means each finger is about 1 degree. 7 minutes is about 1/10 of the width of your finger. So you can get, if you haven't seen it, that's what it's extremely close. The light from the stars is overlaying each other, and well, I don't have 20/20 vision. To me, it looks like just one big bright thing. I suppose if you have perfect 20/20 vision, maybe you can tell that it's actually two stars close to each other. I don't really think so. If you're just looking up, it's just going to look like this big bright thing. If you take a picture of it and zoom it or look through binoculars, you'll see that it's two, quote, stars. They're actually Jupiter and Saturn. And Jupiter was the brighter one. So you see one that's very bright and one that's a little bit dimmer, almost overlaying each other. Like, it looks like a binary star, like two things very, very close. And that combined brilliance of both of them makes this unusually bright star. You will almost never see a star in the sky that bright. Now, it requires a few other things. Jupiter and Saturn cannot be extremely close to the sun when this happens because the light of the sun would blot it out. And the moon can't be up in the sky at the same time and be near being full. That will, make it less brilliant. If there's no moon in the sky, or if it's very thin or near the horizon and the sun is below the horizon, all this sets up the requirements for a very brilliant Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. But the very unusual thing that's needed is that Jupiter and Saturn get so close to each other. And I'll explain why they're not usually this close to each other when they're conjunct, how often they're conjunct, and all those other details. Now, researching this, I found this quote from a website. Jupiter will be at a magnitude of -2, and Saturn will be significantly dimmer at a magnitude of plus 0.6. Negative magnitudes are brighter. That may sound counterintuitive, but Jupiter is the brighter one with a magnitude, means the brightness, to our eyes, -2. The brightest star in the sky is Sirius. It has a magnitude of -1.44. The next brightest is Canopus with a magnitude of -0.62. This means that Jupiter is brighter than the brightest star. And Saturn, with a 0.6 magnitude, which is the same brightness as the 11th brightest star in the sky, the light of both of them is overlapping. And you're getting something that's much brighter than you would normally ever see in the sky. Something that looks like a star, a brilliant, brilliant star. So you can see why people relate this to possibly being the Star of Bethlehem, a spectacularly brilliant star in the sky. Now, in this case, in 2020, you can only see it for a few hours near sunset, just after sunset. If the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is far away from the sun, then you might see it in the middle of the night, or you might see it in the eastern sky, depending on where it happens to occur in relationship to the sun. For us in 2020, it just happened to be visible a little bit after sunset. Okay, so now how do I know that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction occurs at 6:20 p.m.? Well, I can just call up the Sirius software, and here it is, by the way. Here's the chart for 6:20:30 p.m. This is done for London, England. So there's the chart, and you see Jupiter and Saturn exactly conjunct at 0 Aquarius 29. Now, how would I know that? Well, there's several ways to do it. You could just run a listing. You can go to Forecast, Transit Text Listing. Over here, select the second menu item, Transit to Transit. And then you set up one of these transit listings. What I did is I used the asteroids only as a nice place to put up some, to create some unique thing that I'm interested in analyzing. I just picked this menu item, and where am I here? I want, I go to Customize, and I select just Jupiter and Saturn as the transiting planets, and I select just conjunctions. And you run it. So if I run it for, here I'm starting January 1st, 20 BC. This is when I was researching what's going on around the time of the birth of Jesus. But let's run it for January 1st, 2018, for say 4 years. Somewhere to cover 2020, doesn't matter that much. And I run it, and I get the listing, and there it is. Right there. So what we have here, let me increase the size of this. There we go. All on one line. December 21st, 6:20 p.m. This is done for time zone 0 hours. Means it's Greenwich Mean Time. Jupiter at 0 Aquarius 29. Saturn at 0 Aquarius 29. And over here, we have an option to list the latitude of the planets and the declination. I'll talk a little bit more about this right now so we really understand what the latitude is in declination and why I want to show it. If I right-click, I go to Customize. It's right here in the Aspects tab. In the Aspects tab, in the upper right corner, you have an option to check latitude right here, and you can also show declination. And there's another option here, which we will talk about in a minute. And over here under Dates Time, you select time is printed for all aspects. Those are the settings, and then you will know the exact time that any aspect occurs. And then I just enter this birth data, and I create a chart wheel. Now, let me show you how we confirm that the time given by the transit listing is correct. I can go to listings and go to planet positions list. This shows the positions of the planets to the second, and notice that Jupiter and Saturn are at 0 Aquarius, 29 minutes, 10 seconds. Exactly conjunct. If I go to time adjust, and I go 1 minute, I'll change this to 1 minute earlier. So now I'm at 6 hours, 19 minutes, 30 seconds. Notice that Jupiter and Saturn are now different by 1 second. Jupiter's moved back to 9 seconds. No longer a perfect conjunction. I go forward back to the time of 6 hours, 20 minutes, 30 seconds. Go 1 minute past, and now Jupiter's 1 second ahead. This is how we know it's right around 6 hours, 20 minutes, and 30 seconds, because it's right around there that it is exact. Both of them, both Jupiter and Saturn, are exactly at the same position to the second. Now, the calculation of planetary positions is generally accurate to about 1 second of arc. 1 second is extra. It's like the width of a hair. I mean, it's extremely tiny. So to the accuracy of calculations that's possible on our computers, we know it's right around there, right around 6 hours, 20 minutes, 30 seconds Greenwich Mean Time. Okay, so I'm showing you how you can find these things yourself. Very simple. Just produce the transit listing, include the time. You can call up the chart, look at that text listing, time adjust, and make sure it's lining up to the second, and see how far you have to move to make it different. Then you know, without any doubt, that you've got the time when that conjunction is exact. Okay, let's go back to look at the wheel, and let's go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so there it is. 6 hours, 20 minutes, 30 seconds, Greenwich Mean Time. But of course, as I said, Jupiter and Saturn are obviously moving very slowly. To see it anywhere within a few days of that, you will see the full effect of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, very, very bright in the sky. Now, how often do Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions occur? Some of you may know it's about every 20 years. What if you don't know that, or what if you want to confirm it? Again, just run the listing. Instead of running it, you see how you run it in the Sirius software. I've already saved this information in a file, and here it is. Here's the list of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions for 1,000 years, from 1200 to 2199. Well, let me just show you real quickly. All you would do is, if I pull up that listing, if I go to forecast, transit text listing, transit to transit, and I've got my customized listings. I got two variations here, but here's the one I just selected. I would just go to customize, and I do not want this thing checked. I'll explain that later. It's up to you whether you want to include latitude or declination. Just run it. What I did is I ran it starting in whatever year it was, 1220 or something. Let's see. And I put 999 years here and ran it. And you'll get this listing starting in 1200. And what I did here is I saved it to file and then color coded. I highlighted it, read it into a word processing program, and highlighted if it was in an earth sign in yellow, if it's in an air sign in blue, water signs in green, and fire signs in the red font. And as you can see, there will be a sequence of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in an element. So if we go all the way back to 1603, Jupiter's conjunct Saturn at 8 Sagittarius 19 on December 18, 1603, 20 years later in 1623, it's conjunct at 6 Leo 36. Sagittarius and Leo are fire signs. Oh, look at this. I missed this one. Pisces. This should have been green. I overlooked it. So sometimes there's a transition time from water to fire. And I just highlighted this myself, and I overlooked this. Pisces should be green. But anyway, the basic idea is there. You go from water signs to fire signs, and then this transition time where it's sometimes Earth, which is yellow and red, and then it settles into Earth, and then see the transition to air signs. So in 1981, from December 31st, 1980 to July 1981, sometimes the conjunction will happen 3 times, of course, because Jupiter will go past Saturn, retrograde back, conjunct at retrograde, and then a 3rd time. And there the 3 conjunctions take over about a half a year at the very end of 1980 and early 1981. That was in Libra. So the transition from Jupiter and Saturn and Earth to air signs happened in 1980. Some people are saying it's happening now in 2020. That's not quite right. The first Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in air signs was in 1980 in Libra. Then it went back to Taurus and then now into Aquarius. So we're during this transition from Earth, which started in 1842, consistently in Earth, and now in 2020, I believe it will from here on out be consistently in air. So for astrologers, this is a big deal to many astrologers that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are changing element from Earth to air, and you can go back historically and see if that makes sense. Does the change in 1603 to fire signs from water signs, does it make sense? So to astrologers, a spectacular thing about this Jupiter conjunct Saturn is that it's now in Aquarius, although it was in Libra, so it's already transitioned to air. So that's interesting. But to astronomers and also to some astrologers, what's impressive about this conjunction is that Jupiter and Saturn are very, very close to each other. And to understand what's going on there, let me show you something. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. And so we have here that it occurs every 20 years. We've looked at the listing, and we saw the pattern of the changing elements. Now, let's understand a little more about this particular conjunction being only 7 minutes apart. I'll go through this quickly because many of you are already familiar with this. Here's a diagram of the inner planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, with the sun. The yellow thing in the middle is the sun. And this, what is this, a turquoise blue, I guess we can call it, ring is Mercury. And notice that Mercury is tilted relative to the other circles. So we know the planets travel in an ellipse, kind of like an egg kind of shape, and almost in the same plane, but not exactly. They're actually tilted to each other a little bit. And of the inner planets, Mercury has the biggest tilt. And I've taken it and put it in a different color to make that clearer. This is an image taken from a website I've got here airandspace.si.edu, etc. And I touched it up a little bit. I gave this a color. Gave Mercury's orbit a color so it would stand out so you can see that. And here's the image again, and on the left is the inclination of the orbit of each planet. This tilt of the planet relative to the path of the Earth is called the inclination. So the Earth, by definition, has a 0 inclination. Mercury's orbit is tilted 7 degrees relative to the Earth. And we're going to be looking at Jupiter and Saturn because that's what we're talking about in this video. Notice Jupiter has a small inclination, a little over a degree. Saturn also has a fairly small inclination, 2.5 degrees. It means they're slightly tilted relative to the orbit of the Earth, right? Very simple idea. By the way, look down here at Pluto, 17 degrees. So Pluto is really tilted, like big time, relative to the other planets. And some of the Kuiper Belt objects like Haumea, Makemake, Eris, they're tilted even more. So they're not even close to being in the orbit of the planets. All of the planets are in a very similar plane. Pluto is the most obviously different. And here's a diagram of the outer planets starting with Jupiter. And there's Pluto, tremendously tilted. It also has what we call an eccentric orbit. It's very long and skinny. It's like an egg that's been squashed, like very long and skinny. That's called the eccentricity. So here's what happens. Suppose Pluto is over here, where it's shown in this orbit. It happens to be here in its orbit. When it's conjunct Jupiter or Saturn or any other planet, they're almost in a line. They're almost on top of each other. Whereas if Pluto happens to be up here at the top, when its latitude, that distance of the planet above or below the path of the Earth, is called the latitude. So when Pluto's latitude is very high, this would be 17 degrees, the inclination tells us what the maximum latitude is. 17 degrees north or 17 degrees south, even though Pluto is conjunct, say Jupiter or Saturn or any planet, Mercury, Venus, anything, even though it's conjunct, it has the same zodiac longitude, they're actually not close together in the sky. Remember, your hand is about 5 degrees? 17 degrees is like 3 hands. It's like that. So you would see Pluto up here maybe, or down here, and say Jupiter or whatever way down here. They're not even close to each other, even though in astrology we say they're conjunct. So the bottom line is this. If two planets have nearly the same latitude, then they are close to being in an occultation. Occultation means right on top of each other. One has moved right in front of the other. Since Jupiter is closer than Saturn, if Jupiter and Saturn are in an occultation, Saturn ends up behind Jupiter. An eclipse, a solar eclipse, is an occultation. But we use a special word eclipse for sun and moon because it's so different, they're so big. But for two stars, or a planet and a star, it's often called an occultation. So I call them near occultations, almost occultations. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on December 21st, 2020 is a near occultation. Jupiter and Saturn have almost the same latitude. That's why this option, let's go back to this. Oh, it's not here. I have it on the screen. Let me select it again, bring it back up on the screen. That's why we have this option to show the latitude here. And we can see that the latitude of Jupiter, the first one is Jupiter, second one is Saturn. These are the latitudes, these are the declinations. I don't want to talk about declinations here, it's a whole different thing. Let's just look at the first two columns. Although I will mention this, the distance between the declinations will be nearly identical to the distance in latitude at the time of the conjunction. So the distance here is 6 minutes, 20 south 25 versus 20 south 31, and here it's also 6 minutes. So it's, in terms of what it's telling us for these purposes, it's redundant. We can just look at the latitude, and it's 6 minutes different. So before I said, 7 minutes? Between 6 and 7 minutes, probably closer to 6 minutes actually, is the distance that Jupiter and Saturn came. Because they're conjunct, they're both moving almost parallel along the zodiac plane, along the zodiac. They're moving, it's like two cars moving next to each other. And they're 6 minutes apart when they reach exactly together. So they get within 6 minutes. Now, if we look at a listing, which I've produced here, whoops, not there. Where do I want to go? I want to go here. Sorry about that. Let me bring this up and this up. Okay. Here's a listing that I produced for 999 years of Jupiter conjunct Saturn with the latitude and declination. And if you just randomly pick one, say this one, Jupiter is 0 north 50, Saturn 2 north 06. Remember, Jupiter will go a little more than a degree, between a degree and a half. Jupiter up to 2.5 degrees. In this case, they're both north. They're over 1 degree different. Let's randomly, just randomly select another one. This one, 1 south 10, 2 south 14, about a degree. Randomly just select another one. In this case, again, about a degree. So just randomly, and sometimes it could be several degrees because one could be south and one could be north. So it's going to vary. Now, it just happens that when we look at the one on December 21st, 2020, the latitudes are almost identical. And that's what makes it a very bright conjunction, extremely bright, because when they get so close that you're less than about 10 or 15 minutes in latitude, the light of each star overlaps, and it looks like one big thing. And Jupiter is already brighter than the brightest star, Sirius, plus Saturn's very bright. To put them together, it's brilliant. So you can imagine in ancient times when people are looking at the sky for omens, for signs, and you have this brightest star that almost never happens, that would be a sign of something bright, special, and wonderful, probably, depending on other details. Another thing that's mentioned in the Bible is that it rises in the east. And that's a difference between the Star of Bethlehem and the Christmas star of 2020. The Christmas star in 2020 is in the west. The one in the Bible is in the east. So there's, some difference. But the basic idea is similar. Something very bright in the sky. Now, this wonderful feature we have here in the Sirius software, I right-click, go to Customize, go to Aspects tab. I can check this box, Display only if same latitude, and I can pick the maximum latitude. And what I put in here was 7 minutes. To see all conjunctions within 7 minutes. I ran it for that 1,000 years, and here is the listing that is produced. It takes a little while to run, so I've run it already, and it takes a few minutes for it to run through all that. And here is the listing. It happened only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in 1,000 years. Means once every 200 years on average, Jupiter and Saturn are conjunct within 7 minutes or less. And here's the one on December 21st, 2020. So you'll read that astronomers will say this powerful conjunction has not happened since 1623. You can read that. Many of you have probably seen that. Here it is, July 16th, 1623. They got within 5 minutes. Almost the same. 6 minutes in 2020, 5 minutes. They got within 5 minutes in 1623. So we have just confirmed what the astronomers are telling us. It has indeed been since 1623. By the way, all these dates are what we call new style dates. Some people use old style prior to a certain year. Just to let you know, if you see a different date, it's probably an old style date. So I think astronomers tend to use new style. I don't know. Anyway, it's a new style date. So there it is. It is an extremely rare conjunction, which means that this extremely bright Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is in fact very rare. Now another conjunction which can be very bright is Venus-Jupiter, because Venus can be bright in the sky. But Venus, here's the difference. How far can Venus get from the sun? From the Earth's point of view, 47 degrees. This means that when Venus is conjunct Jupiter, it's always going to be limited to just after sunrise or just after sunset. It will not happen overhead. You will never see a brilliant Venus-Jupiter conjunction overhead because the sun is near. It's going to be within 47 degrees. A brilliant Jupiter-Saturn conjunction can occur overhead. It's not limited because Jupiter and Saturn are not always near the sun. So that's one difference. Venus-Jupiter conjunction can be brilliant, but just like this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which happens to be about 30 degrees from the sun, happens to be fairly close to the sun, a Venus-Jupiter conjunction will always be like that. Always near the sun, always happening for a few hours, just before sunrise or just after sunset. You know, sun has to be below the horizon, obviously, to see. It's got to be nighttime. Okay, so we are confirming and we're seeing how you can use the Sirius software to see these kind of details. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. Putting all the pieces of the puzzle here together. Okay. Excuse me. So here it is in the listing. 0 South 29, 0 South 23. Put that in bold to emphasize that. They get within 6 minutes. Making the Christmas star. Is it really special? Is it really a unique event in our lifetimes? Yes, yes, yes. It really is. It really is brilliant. I was surprised when I got on my roof and went, holy moly, that thing is really bright. Okay, and here I've put the list. I copied and pasted it onto this PowerPoint page so it's bigger and you can read it. But it's just what we already saw in the file. These are the conjunctions within a 7-minute orb over the past 1,000 years. And this is the one we're experiencing in our lifetimes. Okay. In 2080, there will be another one. So young children will have the opportunity, if they live a nice long life, to experience another one in March of 2080. Okay. Now, excuse me, the outer planets Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are not visible, of course, so a bright Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which occurs every 20 years, can be viewed by people who are looking at the sky as a sign. And the idea of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions being associated with a change in the king, Jupiter was related to the kings in very ancient astrology, going back to Babylonia, it was often seen as a sign of a new king. So, we have this phrasing used of many different phrases, Christ the Savior, Christ the King, etc. So this reinforces our feeling that maybe it was Jupiter in some way that heralded, that there was a sign of Jupiter in the sky. And since Jupiter-Saturn is relatively rare every 20 years and can be very bright, it does make sense that it could be a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Also, the idea that the Bible in biblical times, people would be using astrology as omens, very definitely. You get the reaction against astrology from the church a lot through the Middle Ages, but there are several quotes in the Bible from the Old Testament. For example, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons. So there it is. Why do we have all this stuff going on in the sky? Well, it creates the seasons and also creates signs. And for days and years, Genesis 1:14. Okay. So here I mentioned in ancient Babylonian astrology, Jupiter was related to kings. Johannes Kepler speculated that a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 6 BC might be the Star of Bethlehem. Kepler correctly noted that Jupiter was conjunct Saturn 3 times in 6 BC. And here they are. So I just ran that let's see here. Here it is. From year -20 to +20, Jupiter was conjunct Saturn 4 times, 3 times in the year -6. Now, if you're not familiar with this, let me explain this. Astronomers have a year 0. With BC and AD, there is no year 0. So you go from 1 BC to 1 AD. There's no 0. So the year -6, an astronomical year -6, is 7 BC. Is that confusing? I hope not. Just remember, astronomers have a year 0. Our calendar does not. We go from 1 BC to 1 AD. So the year -6 is actually 7 BC. So on May 27th, 7 BC, September 29th, and December 3rd, all 7 BC, Jupiter was conjunct Saturn and here's the big question, was it a dramatic, spectacular Jupiter-Saturn? One of these very rare ones where there's within minutes of each other, like we're experiencing now in 2020? Answer, no. They are not spectacular. The latitudes are about 1 degree different. Excuse me. They're 1 degree apart, which is about the width of your finger. You'll see a lot of stars within about 1 degree, and the light is not overlaying each other to create this brilliant effect once they get 1 degree apart. I mean, it's pretty cool, but it's not like what I saw when I got up on the roof of my house on December 22nd, and pow, this big, bright, brilliant thing like you'll almost never ever see. That didn't happen. Not with Jupiter and Saturn. So this is how you can confirm these things. Okay. So that's I'm just referring to these 4 things. These are the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions close to the birth of Jesus. The one in the year 14 is considered to be too far away. One of these 3 is the one that Johannes Kepler and other people thought maybe. So maybe even though it's not that spectacular, maybe if a third object got in between them or something else, maybe. But by itself, not quite that impressive. Okay. All right. Hopefully this is all making sense to you. We're understanding what makes something brilliant in the sky. and how we can see it very precisely, the exact number of minutes between things, and how often things occur, so we have a sense of exactly what's happening. Okay. Probably the Bethlehem star was not Jupiter conjunct Saturn, at least based on what we've seen so far. Okay, the apparent diameter of the sun and the moon is about 1/2 degree. This is another way to get a sense of this. So the distance of 1 degree between Jupiter and Saturn is the distance of like 2 full moons. It's not. You really want to be within about 10 minutes, I would say. You want the two objects to be within about 10 minutes. It could be 2 planets like Jupiter and Saturn. Another possibility would be a star like a bright star like Regulus. Regulus is regal. It's associated with kings. Some people have speculated that maybe the Star of Bethlehem was Jupiter conjunct Regulus. So it could be a star and a planet, or it could be 2 planets. Would both create a brilliant effect. So once a year, Jupiter will be conjunct Regulus. Once every 12 years. Once every 12 years, as Jupiter makes its orbit every 12 years, Jupiter will be conjunct Regulus. Sometimes it'll go retrograde. It happened 3 times. But again, Jupiter can be, what do we say, between 1 and 1.5 degrees off the ecliptic plane. Every once in a while, it could land right on Regulus. That would be fairly spectacular as well. So these are all possibilities of what can create something very bright in the sky. I think this is great for astrologers to know about, because people will ask, they ask these questions like, is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction the Star of Bethlehem? Did it happen when Jesus was born? All these kind of things. And a lot of astrology now is very visual, so it's good to look at these things. You know what? I'm already at 42 minutes. I'm going to stop here and break this into 2 sections, and I'll just pick up with this slide here in part 2. And we're going to learn more details about things that happened around the time that Jesus was born, and get an idea about this Star of Bethlehem. Okay, I will stop here. We'll continue in part 2. Thank you very much. God bless. Namaste.